Well met, everyone. I am Rich Delich, and today I made a dungeon. I want to talk you through it a little bit. Let's see what's what. Here is the dungeon on screen. I'm going to get my Wacom set up very quickly so that I can draw over it with, let's use yellow today. That way I can doodle and noodle and work my way through this thing. So what am I trying to do today? What's the point of the video? I'd like to just simply show you a bit of my process. I don't know if I'm going to do anything with this dungeon. I don't know if this is going to be something I'm going to bring to any game or to my table. Maybe I just made it for video purposes, but there's just a couple of things that you want to think through, that I think through at least, and maybe you'll be inspired to go out there and make your own dungeon and provide some cool gameplay bits for your group as a result. So dungeons are, when you think about the term, if we're talking specifically Dungeons and Dragons, there's a reason why it's called that. I believe that regardless of what your setting in your world is, there has to be one or the other, if not both. There has to be dungeons and or a dragon somewhere in your world. It's the iconic thing. It's exciting. It's something that immediately conjures up certain images for us, right? Whether we're talking about the Tolkien stuff of Moria or Smog, or we're talking, Smaug, however they say it. Or, whether you're looking at things from various video games, delving deep into the various Diablo games where you go beneath the ground, the Underdark, right? The iconic stuff. So a dungeon, I believe it needs to be a place of danger. First and foremost, sure, there can be a very high component of exploration, and yes, you can certainly meet NPCs and various races and factions that you meet, but it needs to be an unwelcoming place. That being said, it doesn't always need to just devolve down to its base level of the only thing you do there is roll initiative. There's things you want to walk through and consider. Down here on the bottom, we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points that I want to cover really quick. When you're building the dungeon, and you explain it to your players, think of who built it. Think of who occupies it. For that group, whoever it may be that's currently occupying it, is it a home for them or is it more of a prison? Is it some race or some faction or some individual that was forced down into this dungeon and this is the only place that they can find some sort of refuge? Do they even want to be there, right? Answer that question. Can they leave the dungeon? Are they stuck there? Is it something where they're similar to a prison? Again, are they bound to the dungeon? Do they even want to leave? What's the timer? How do you get your players to go from point A to point B? If it's entrance to exit, how do you funnel your players through the dungeon so that they don't linger? Besides just the normal danger and the threat and the inhospitable environment where your players are just itching to get the hell out of there, is there any sort of a timer? And then, most importantly, that should technically have been number one. I didn't really go in order, but is the dungeon fun? Are there enough fun bits in various points? Oftentimes we can get into that old school, pull out a piece of graph paper and just start drawing a maze-like series of boxes. We see those dungeons everywhere. They've been around in the tabletop role-playing space for 40 years, right? But ask yourself, each of those rooms, is it fun? Do you need to have that many hallways? If there's nothing fun and it's just tedium of getting from point A to point B to point A to point B because it looks good on a map, a dungeon always seems to occupy so much more space or so many more interesting visual bits to look at on a map when you print it out. But once you actually get it to the table and your players are navigating their way through it, some of those twists and turns and corridors and maze-like atmosphere can be not as much fun. So let's just take a look very quickly. I built this, as I said, for no particular reason. I just threw a few things together, and everything that has the checkerboard, the grid, is kind of just my indication of places that the PCs can go. Everything in black is negative space or the areas that the PCs can't go, so on and so forth. First one you want to always think about when you're building a dungeon and you're presenting it to your players, who built it? That's going to inform the style of architecture. Here, most things are very geometric. They're symmetrical. So, yes, you can always scream to normal dwarven architecture, right? Very blocky. If you look at their motif, their armors, I pulled this from the behind the scenes Weta Digital. I talk about this all the time. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. The elves were very sinewy, very elegant, building within nature, whereas the dwarves were very square, right? Sort of indicative of their personality and their culture and their civilization. So here we're looking at a dungeon that's a little more blocky. So I can certainly say it's some group that was dwarven in nature, perhaps, or inspired by that, if that's what your dwarves are about in your world. Maybe it's your elves that are the ones that are very symmetrical and rigid, and your dwarves are a little more free and whatever. So just think through who built it, because that's going to also start to give you some details. As I said, don't just have arbitrary rooms for no reason. If I make this room, I need to occupy it with various tapestries on the wall. Maybe there's some statues over here. You know what? I'm going to use a different color. Let's go pink, because that's just cooler. Stands out a little better. So I may have some tapestries on the walls. I may have some statues in the corner. But instead of thinking, hey, what tapestries do I want in this room? What are the books on that bookshelf? What do the floor tiles look like? Are there any runes and floor patterns that are, doing something or giving some sort of symbol that my PCs, the rogue, think it's a trap or whatever? Well, the one way to answer that and keep some consistency is just simply ask who built this place. Especially when those individuals, that race, that civilization is now gone and no longer existing within the dungeon, they can leave the remnants of it, right? No different than us going to UNESCO World Heritage sites and seeing the Roman Colosseum and, Machu Picchu and whatever, right? So who built it can kind of start to fill in your spaces for you. Next, who occupies it, especially when it's different than the group that built it. Who's currently still here? Okay, that's a big question, because you can then start to mix and match between who built it and what was that architectural style. And the goblins have now invaded the place, a century ago, and various generations of goblins have lived here. How have they changed it? If it's Umber Hulks that now live here, what was previously well built and architecturally strong and, pillars and columns, now there's just tunnels and holes everywhere and the place is half collapsing, right? Don't just say, well, because it sounds cool, you come to this chamber and you notice the whole back wall is collapsed. That sounds good, and we hear that all the time. But when you kind of go backwards and you think of, kind of like I talk about where function informs design, right? When you draw a monster, a rhino with no mouth, well, how does he function then? How does he eat? And that's going to help you determine, all right, do I need to put a mouth somewhere else? Do I even need to have a mouth at all? So on and so forth. Is when you think of the Umber Hulks that were living there, that is why the back wall is collapsed. And it starts to make a little more sense. The PCs kind of walk in and they believe that this is not just a print and play map and you're just running them through something. It seems to fit within the world. And they may start thinking through, all right, well, there's going to be some cult that worship the Umber Hulks. What are the other monsters in the book that kind of hang out with Umber Hulks? What sort of items and magic items might we find in a place that has been heavily populated by Umber Hulks? They start to think through what are some threats and hazards. We may not only just be fighting and having to roll initiative and dealing with the actual monsters that are in the place, but now we have some environmental hazards, like there may be cave-ins that we need to think about. Guys, always keep your head up above and looking up, so on and so forth. Just by simply asking who occupies it now and what's changed from how it was built, if it's different, and who is currently here. And then for that group that's occupying it, the next one is it a home to them? That can start to inform us, no different than us in real life, right? In our home, we defend our territory. How territorial are these things? Maybe the PCs broke through the entrance door and got through the various glyphs and wards, and all that the individuals living here want to do is they want to leave. But they feel like they've been sealed in the whole time, and the PCs, thankfully, now just open the door for them. So they're just trying to run out. Maybe the PCs are just trying to come down here and get something. But if the PCs are running from something and they need to come in this dungeon and use it as a place of refuge and a place to call home for a week or something like that, now you may be conflicting with, there's another group that's already here that's calling this place home. The next one is, can that group, whoever's here, can they leave? Can they actually get out of this place? Here you see I have an exit down here and I have an exit over here. Okay, this was intended to be sort of a portal thing, maybe, or just a tunnel system or a cave that goes up above and leaves. And here, this is an actual like back door to the place. So yes, you want to think through when you ask, can they leave, whoever's currently here? And this could apply to the PCs. Once the PCs are in, how do they get back out? Can they just go back out the front door that they came in? But you want to think literally, mechanically, is there a back door? The folk that are living here are not just idly, it's not a video game thing where they're just sitting there waiting for you to open the door. If there's a big bad guy that the PCs are coming into this dungeon to kill, he's going through his goals, his checklist of what am I trying to do here? Why am I in this dungeon? I'm experimenting on these golem construct creations. For the 4 days that your PCs are roaming through the dungeon, he's still creating those things. And maybe, and this can kind of tie into down below, which we'll get into in a little bit, the timer aspect of maybe that becomes a little bit of the timer of they need to get through this dungeon and do whatever they need to do and get to the boss before he just straight goes out the back door. You know what I mean? Like, think of when your PCs try and take advantage of trying a long rest because they're mechanically sort of gaming it and trying to make sure they have full spells before they go into the next hazardous room. But all of a sudden, they get to the final room, and the thing they're looking for, and you just tell them, there's an altar, but the religious artifact you were here for is gone. Dude, you guys have been in this dungeon for 3 days. You wanted to try and long rest after every battle. He's gone. He's out. He rolled out with the religious artifact. Mission failed. Think through things like that. So that's where the exit system comes into play of more so than can the PCs leave, because you'll always figure a way out, right? If you know you have more content in the forest to the north, they'll make their way out eventually. But more so think of, can the bad guys leave? Especially if they're in sort of a prison sort of mentality where they feel like all they're trying to do is escape and the PCs broke the seal. So where are your exit points and how do they get out of there? Also, of course, do they want to leave? How steadfast are they in, this is my home, you're invading it, and we're pushing you out? Because that's going to start to inform patrols, what kind of guards there are, just sort of what's the overall presence of the group that's currently in the dungeon or the various monsters. Even if it's just undead. If that big bad lich in the back corner over here doesn't want to leave, he's going to make sure that he rallies all undead towards these front areas. Okay? Because he doesn't want to leave, you leave. You came into my home, you get the hell out of here. Okay? As we get into the timer, that's one like I talked about where sometimes the timer is, you can indicate to the players, he's in the dungeon doing some bad things, get to him before he leaves or before he finishes his task. Or maybe the timer is something of he's building golems and right now he's built one. If you can get, he builds one every half day. So he builds 2 a day. If the PCs linger and try and long rest, you tell him, hey guys, you've been in here 3 days. He's probably built 6 golems now. So now when you fight the big bad boss, he's got 6 golems with him. Sometimes that can be a timer. I did one in a previous campaign where it was a dungeon that you were not supposed to be in. It was a horrible place. They knew that. But there was this invisible force. Nothing you can do about it. You can't dispel it. It doesn't even turn off with anti-magic fields. There's just an invisible force of disintegration, basically. A wall, like a cloud, a mattress of disintegration. That sounds cool, right? Was just pushing them forward. And that was my way of saying you're not going to have time to long rest, ever. Not just because, that was the sort of ambient environmental threat. That was its own timer. So you always want to have some sort of a timer. Don't let your PCs linger in a place that you're intending to be very dangerous for them. It reminds them that they're rushed, that they're not working on their own terms here. And that's a good thing you want to focus on. And then finally, like I said in the beginning, this thing can certainly be at the top. What's fun? What's fun about each of your rooms? If it's not fun, don't have them go through. If you have they come into a cavern, something like this area, and you decide to create this, cavernous thing, but branching off of it, are all of these corridors, right? We see this all the time. But now you have to think through, not only is this overwhelming, but wherever this ends, Is there something fun here, 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 and here? If you can't think of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fun things, and notice this is one crossroads of my dungeon. If I duplicate this guy, right, and then you kind of figure out how to put it all together, and this corridor leads to this corridor, and blah, blah, blah. We've seen stuff like this, right? If I was to turn everything off, we've seen dungeons that start looking that way or whatever. But think through that process of what is going on that's fun there. If you're not going to be able to come up with fun points and good bits here and here and here and here and here and here, and you need to decide what's fun for you and your group, of course, naturally, right? You know, whether every one of them has some sort of a combat, right? There's a random encounter in every single one, or there's some treasure, or there's an investigation, a skill challenge. Maybe it's just some interesting bits that add into your history and your lore, going back to who built it, who occupies it, and sort of the backstory to the place, right? But if there's not something fun there, well, what you need to then do is just simply get rid of. And this only has 2 chambers, and that's it. All I need is this, because I can only come up with 2 fun points from that thing, or 3 fun points, right? Branching off. So always think through when you're adding in all this other stuff. It can look good on paper, and that's always I guess that's the lesson of the day, if you will. I created this. I didn't know where I was going with it, but now I'm forced to populate. What are these? There's a lot. But why did I make 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? What is it? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 16 statues. Because the other thing that you have to think about with dungeons is there's always that element of PCs. It's just natural, right? It's been around for so long. There's got to be secret doors here. There's a reason why there's 8 statues on each side. There's a reason, you know what I mean? Like, the PCs almost start to come up with their own stories. And the other good thing you can do, though, is you can use those things as content. One thing I remember reading about, and it was fascinating, is when you create a puzzle, and you know, especially when it's one of those that bogs down the session for an hour and a half, but it's a stopgap, what I call it, where if they don't get through that puzzle, they don't get through the invisible wall, which is they need to get through in order to get out of the dungeon. Well, if they don't figure out your puzzle, your campaign just grinds to a halt. It's done. Stop. It stops right there. But one thing I remember reading is sometimes your PCs start going along a train of thought where, like, dude, no, I get it. The red relates to the red tapestry. There's red tiles on the floor. So we have to do something with the red tapestry in order to be able to move those red tiles, which will activate some Indiana Jones-esque pulley system that opens the door. If your puzzle notes don't have anything about the red tapestry and the red tiles on the floor, the minute your PCs are on that 5-minute tangent of red tapestry related to those, you now include that into your puzzle. Let them start figuring that out. Even though your notes say nothing about the red tapestry having anything to do with it, if your PCs go that way, run with it. Always think through that. And what happens is, as your PCs start thinking through, there's got to be a secret door here. There's got to be a secret door in one of these. Maybe there wasn't, but just create something where there is now a secret door here. I didn't have it on the map, and it wasn't in my notes, but the PCs are on that tangent. Make a secret door there that leads them into here. So that way they can bypass all the other content because they figured something out there. Reward the players, not just so much for their insight and their thoughts, but reward the players when they invest time. Because the contrast, or the opposite of that, is your PCs just invested a tremendous amount of time in game, like real time, right? They just spent 42 minutes grinding through these statues to figure out if there's a secret door to get through it. And then what happens when they find out that that's a red herring? Like, there's nothing there. That can start to suck. Because if that happens in your first chamber of your dungeon, the whole dungeon is going to remind them that no matter where they are, that 40 minutes they invested might just be for nothing. And that now becomes you versus them, which sucks because you as the DM have all the info, they don't. So think through that process and remind yourself every half hour of game, less than that, every 10 minutes of gameplay, is there something fun here? Are my PCs now just spinning the wheels to no end? Let them spin the wheels as long as you're going to reward them with something at the end. So dungeons can be kind of a weird, finicky thing, but hopefully some little bits here helped you out. Thanks everyone for watching, and take care.